Video 37, Math Lesson 5.5. Today we'll talk about how to rename a fraction as a decimal. This is the information from the student reference book, about the equivalent fractions method. One way to rename a fraction as a decimal is to find an equivalent fraction with a denominator that is a power of 10. Such as 10, 100, or 1,000. This method works only for some fractions. Let's take a look at an example. Let's say if you're asked to rename 3/5 as a decimal. Now, if you think about what 3/5 looks like, here's our one whole. If we shade in 3/5, that's what it looks like. Now, we know that 3/5 is equivalent to 6/10. Either we can look at the picture to see that, or we can use the golden rule of finding equivalent fractions, multiply 5 times 2 to get 10, and multiply 3 times 2 to get 6. So we know that 3/5 is equivalent to 6/10. Well, 6/10 as a fraction looks like this, but 6/10 as a decimal looks like this. And you say it the same way. So when you hear the fraction 6/10, you can also visualize the decimal 6/10. That's one way to rename a fraction as a decimal. And this is the way that you would need to use if you were not allowed to use a calculator. Now, if you are using a calculator, you can do things a little bit different way. You can also rename a fraction as a decimal by dividing the numerator by the denominator using a calculator. Remember I told you every fraction is also a division problem? Well, here's where it comes in handy to remember that. For example, if you needed to rename 2/3 as a decimal, in your calculator you just punch in 2 divided by 3 equals. Now, you're going to get a big long answer like this because it doesn't work out evenly. But if you round it off, usually we might round it to like the nearest hundredth or something, you can see that it would be 0.67. Another example, if you had to rename 5/6 as a decimal, key in 5 divided by 6 equals, and then you get your big long answer. Sometimes they do work out more evenly, but these are examples where probably fill up your calculator display. Usually what we want to do with these is round them to the nearest hundredth, so then we would put 0.83 as the equivalent decimal. Sometimes it might be a repeating digit or a repeating pattern, and then you could use the repeating bar too when you write your answer. So here's what I want you to put into your notes about this topic. So go to your next clean page, put the topic at the top, changing fractions to decimals. And first we're going to put down notes without a calculator. So copy this down. Try to make an equivalent fraction with one of the decimal places as a denominator. What I mean by that is like so that it would be tenths or hundredths or thousandths, etc. Primarily, you're just going to use tenths and hundredths. For example, let's say your fraction was 3/5 or 3/4. Now, I know if my denominators are 4, I can think 4 quarters in a dollar. So I know that 4 times 25 is 100. So if I multiply times 25, I get 100 in my denominator. I also have to multiply my numerator times 25, and I get 75. 75 hundredths as a fraction looks like this as a decimal, 0.75. We still say that number, 75 hundredths. Put these examples in your notes also. The second example, 1 2/5. Well, I know that 2/5 is equivalent to 4/10. I can multiply both the denominator and the numerator by 2. So 1 2/5 is equal to 1 4/10. And 4/10 I know is 0.4, so 1 4/10 would be 1.4. Make sure you have this information copied into your notes before you move on. Now we're going to talk about using a calculator. Okay, so put using a calculator. What you do is divide the numerator by the denominator. It's always numerator divided by denominator. Remember I said to think about that fraction bar as a division symbol. Okay, and we're also going to put an example in your notes, a couple examples. Okay, again, let's use that 3/4. So if your fraction is 3/4 and you're asked to change it to a decimal, using a calculator, all you need to do is punch in 3 divided by 4 equals, and your display will show 0.75. Another example, if you have 7/8 and you're asked to write it as a decimal number, just punch in 7 divided by 8 equals, and your display will show 0.875. If you are allowed to use your calculator, that is wonderful, because as you can see, it's very easy. But do not forget how you can do it without a calculator. In fact, I'm going to tell you right now that several times on your assessments, unit assessments, you will be asked that question to explain how to change a fraction into a decimal when you're not allowed to use a calculator. Make sure you have these notes and examples copied down into your notebook.